Today, our topic is leaving a legacy for your children. One of my favorite verses is Luke chapter 1, verse 17b. And it says, He will turn the hearts of fathers back to their children, and He will turn the disobedient to the righteous patterns of thinking. Fatherhood is not for wimps. It's a tough job with a huge upside, but littered with some pitfalls. One piece of advice I would give to young fathers who don't work so hard, that you forget to be there for your children. We as breadwinners get sucked into a rat race mindset, and the trap is so subtle. It draws you in rather quickly. It convinces you that providing for your family is all that matters. Today we want to talk about with Blake Brewer, really kind of a mission that he's got on his heart to help a million dads write a meaningful, lasting legacy letter to their children. So I'm so glad to have Blake on my podcast today. How you doing there, Blake?
Keith, I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be here. I've been looking forward to this all week, and I jumped out of bed this morning. I said, I think Keith and I are going to have a good conversation today, and I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited too. I look forward to doing this. So I'd like to give my guests a chance to kind of warm up in our conversation here. So my start for you is, what's the best advice you ever received?
Well, I think the best advice that I ever received was from my father, and my father told me that as long as I'm living in accordance with God's word, then I'm going to be okay, and to live my life in accordance with God's word, and to have an eternal perspective in life. And I've lived by that as I've made different decisions in life, as I guide my family. Um, that advice is definitely the best advice I've received.
That's powerful. I remember one time doing a sermon on legacy, and I used that famous poem, The Dash, if you remember hearing that poem, about our lives are marked by two markers, the flag at the beginning and the flag at the end. But what's important is a dash in the middle. And I always kind of ask people in that sermon, how is your dash going? What legacy are you leaving, and what's that legacy look like? And so today I'm looking forward to talk about that with you, especially for fathers. That's an important role. So tell us about yourself.
Well, I'm down here in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I have an amazing wife, and we've been married 11 years. And we have a 5-year-old daughter, Gracie Kate, a 3-year-old son, Bo, and then a 4-month-old, Brooks. And man, I am absolutely just loving being a dad, and wrestling with my kids and doing all the good dad stuff, and really trying to mentor my kids and train my kids and be that guiding voice in their life in the same way that my dad was for me. Uh, so that's a little bit about me.
Is it cold in Oklahoma right now? I know it's cold in Iowa.
Yeah, it's freezing cold, man. We got down to 12 degrees this past week, and we had a slumber party in my master bedroom. It's the warmest room in the house. So I've got my two kids down at the foot of the bed, and then my baby next to us and his little thing. And my wife says, "Man, this is the best I feel, like knowing that all my kids are like in the same room with us. I just feel so safe."
That's neat. So you mentioned, and when we talked a little bit about the power of a father's voice, take us deeper into that concept, if you don't mind.
Well, I absolutely believe that the most powerful voice on the planet is a father's voice. I think maybe the best way to talk about it is to talk about my own father and the voice in my life from him. Just like anybody else, I've faced a lot of different trials, a lot of different situations, a lot of big decisions, small decisions. And I'm so grateful that my father's voice was there, telling me, "Hey, I love you. I'm proud of you. You can't fail." And that's the message I received from my dad. It doesn't matter what I do. My dad is going to love me no matter what. One of the decisions that I faced is when I was graduating college. And my dad was not physically in my life anymore. We're going to get into that story, but his voice was. And I was trying to decide if I was going to go get a business job. I had got my accounting degree. Of course, I was going to go get a business job. This is what made the most sense. But then this campus ministry that I got involved in began to recruit me to come on staff with them. And it didn't make sense at all. It was going to be less money, less financial security, less prestige. Like, why would I go do this job? But deep in my heart, I knew that that's what God was calling me to go do. And Keith, I don't know if you've ever done this before, but when God's calling you to go do something, you're like, well, I don't know is he really calling me to go do that? I better take a couple months. And so that's what I did. I took a couple months to make this, what seemed like a big decision. And it was during that time, my father's voice just kept coming back to me and saying, look, if God is calling you to go do this, it may not make sense to the rest of the world, but you just have to trust him and he's going to take care of you. And I had some fears and insecurities about there were some things about this job that I knew I was going to have to do that I was scared. And my dad, I could just hear him saying, hey, you're going to be okay as long as you're trusting God. And I'm so glad I made that decision, ended up going into campus ministry for over a decade, met my wife during that time. We were at one school for 5 years, and then we got to go launch a new campus within the same organization. Didn't know a single person at Missouri State when we got there. And by the time we left, hundreds and hundreds of people had come to faith. Every fraternity and sorority, which is where we spend a lot of our time, guys on the football team were following Christ and leading Bible studies. And to just think that I would have potentially missed out on all of that had my father's voice not been there guiding me. So absolutely, I believe in the power of a father's voice. But I will say, I think, especially as I'm a dad now and I'm looking around and in the culture that we're in, I think it's harder than ever for a father to get his voice into his child's life.
Yeah, that's true. I like that thing you said about when God is pursuing you, you can't really get away from it.
Yeah.
I tried running for a year and it just did. Somehow he's faster than I am. So,
Yeah.
um, with the breakup of the family today, you sort of touched on a little bit just now, and you said hard is for our culture for fathers really to connect with their children to hear their father's voice. Kind of talk us through that. There's so many things that pull us away from what our parents taught, our fathers tell us. How can people out there reconnect with their father's voice?
Well, I think as we look at the time that we're in, I kind of break it down into three main things that make it so difficult for a father right now to connect with his children, for a person to hear his father's voice. And number one, it starts with the culture. And if you go back to the Industrial Revolution, for the first time in human history, fathers are having to go off to work and leave their families. Before that, fathers were very much a part of raising their children, training up their children, teaching their children, like their legacy. The thing that they were most proud of was their family, and they're thinking about their grandchildren, their great grandchildren. And you look at Abraham and his whole lineage there, like it's very much about their family. Well, then fathers go off to work, and all of a sudden it's the mom's job to raise their children. And so culturally, you start to see that seep in to where fathers start to kind of believe this lie now. Hey, I'm not important, my voice isn't important. And then we see on TV, fathers are kind of the beer guzzling idiot. And so that kind of seeps into your mind, like even good dads that want to be good dads, you see that, and this lie starts to seep in. So number one, our culture doesn't it doesn't set us up as fathers to just have confidence in our voice. Number two, when the information age comes, and so the internet, and so now our voices, we're trying to speak into our children's life, it's just kind of noisy out there because we have access to more information than we've ever had before in history. Like it's almost easier, instead of going to ask your dad for advice, to just Google, like, what would a good father say? And so a father is competing with all of that. And then the third one, which is very closely tied to that, is social media. So the stats are that a child spends 7.5 to 9 hours a day on average on social media. And so on social media, who are they listening to? Everybody but their father. So for some, they're listening to celebrities, people that you would never even trust with a child. And for the first time in history, our children have access to those people's thoughts and are listening to them. But then also, it could just be people at school. And so we know that one of the roles or jobs of a father is to help his child with their identity and determine and know who they are as a person. And so when a person is not getting their identity from their father but from their peers, which is so much easier with social media, you can look all day long and see what your peers are doing, what they're thinking, and what that's led to is um, a lot of people that don't know who they are, their identities formed by their peers, they're less successful in life, they're more likely to commit suicide. There, there's all these stats that go with it that they're just not as emotionally intelligent because their identity was not formed by their father, and so they're just so much more insecure as they compare themselves to everybody else. And so my message to dads though is, yeah, it might be harder than ever to connect with your children and be that voice, but we can't just throw our hands up in the air and say, okay, it's too hard, I can't, I give up. Man, we've got to do whatever it takes because our children are absolutely counting on us, and that's why fathers are coming to me and saying, hey, I want to participate in this legacy letter challenge. Like, I know that I need to get my voice into my children's life.
That's powerful. So tell us about what happened with your dad, because I think that kind of led to your legacy letter, right? So let's dig into that story and how you got to the ministry you're working on now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my mission is to help a million dads, as you talked about, write at least one well-written, meaningful, lasting legacy letter. And it was absolutely formed out of a personal tragedy. May 23rd, 2003, my family and I went on a trip to Hawaii. I was 19 years old, and we had been on vacations before, but obviously this was like a pinnacle vacation, man. We were so excited. And the first day that we were there, we decided to go to Hanama Bay, which, if you've ever been there, it's a beautiful place, beautiful beach. And after snorkeling for a little bit, we all kind of came and laid down on the beach. My sister was laying down, my mom was laying down, I laid down, and so my brother and grandmother were back at the condo, but my dad never laid down. And he finally said, look, we're in Hawaii, like, I'm going back out there, I'm not just going to sit here on the beach. And uh, my dad was an athlete. He was drafted in the NFL by the Falcons. So that was kind of my claim to fame growing up. My dad was Terry Bradshaw's tight end, caught his first collegiate touchdown pass. I have a cool picture of my dad and Terry Bradshaw and President Nixon in the Oval Office in their senior year of college. So my dad, he was like, man, I don't need to rest, I'm going back out there. And so I remember him walking down the beach, and I was laying there on that towel, and I thought, man, I just want to go be with my dad. And so I ran to catch up to him, and I'll never forget that look on my dad's face. And he just smiled and said, look who decided to join me. And I just felt in that moment, and this is one of the best things that a dad can do for their children, is to just simply enjoy their children, and they'll know that they're loved. And that's what I felt in that moment from my dad. And so we went out in the water, and we were looking at all the cool fish, saw a sea turtle, but of course, Keith, we weren't just going to stay in the shallow end. We just wanted to keep exploring. And so we kept going out further and further. And we ended up in the area of this bay called Witch's Brew. I now know it's called Witch's Brew, and the water is known for being very treacherous. And so I put my head up out of the water, and I was like, where did my dad go? And the waves were just so big, I couldn't even hardly see very well. And I saw my dad trying to get out of the water on this rock. And it was really the only place to get out of the water, but it was not a good spot to get out because the waves were just crashing against this rock. And sure enough, as he was about halfway out of the water, this wave comes and crashes against him and knocks him back down in the water. And I just knew that I needed to get over there to see how he was doing. And so I swam, but I was exhausted myself. And I thought, gosh, I got to get out of the water. The only place to get out is at that same rock. By the grace of God, I'm able to get out of the water. And I'm standing on top of the rock, and I look down in the water, and there's my dad. And my dad is treading water, but he looks up at me and he yells for help. And my dad had this very deep, booming voice, and this was a whimper. So I knew that he was in trouble. I immediately turned around towards the beach. It was several hundred yards off, and they looked like ants over there. But I just started waving profusely and yelling for help. I had no idea if they could see me or not. I turned back around and there was my daughter or my dad just treading water. And I knew I had to do something. I could not just stand there and watch him go under. And so I jumped in the water after my dad, and he was probably 20 yards away and just started swimming. And by the time I got to my dad, he was actually underneath the water and he was unconscious. And so at this point, I'm like, oh my gosh, this really is serious. And I put my arms around him and did the best that I could to hold his head above water as I'm swimming, trying to get to the shore, which is on the other side of that rock. And luckily, there had been a nearby snorkeler who heard me yelling for help. He showed up right at the exact time I needed him because I was not doing well. He takes over for my dad. I swim to shore. The lifeguards end up showing up and they help this snorkeler bring my dad into shore, and they started doing CPR on my dad on the beach. And I remember getting on my hands and knees next to my dad and just crying out to God, God, will you please save my dad right now? And when you're watching the movies and you see them doing CPR to someone, you just, and their eyes open up and the water, eventually comes out of their mouth. And I just knew that this was going to happen at any moment, but it wasn't. My mom and sister were on the beach and they saw all the commotion and they said, hey, that's where Dad and Blake were. And so they ran over, and I'll never forget my mom running up to me. And I just threw my arms around her and I said, Mom, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look good. They ended up loading my dad and my mom into the ambulance and they took him to the hospital. My sister and I gathered up our stuff, got in the rental car, and our job was to go back to the condo to get my brother and grandmother. And I was dreading seeing my brother and grandmother and having to break the news to them. But when we arrived, my mom had already called my grandmother from the hospital and said that they had pronounced my dad dead. And at that point, I knew that it was over. Like I'd lost, there was no hope that, but it was so surreal. I just couldn't even believe what had just happened. We went to the hospital and I just remember looking at my dad there and he still had, of course, had his swimming trunks on, and just looking at my dad just laying there like, what in the world just happened? This was literally one of the best days of my life, just like less than an hour ago. And now my dad is laying here. My life is going to be completely different now. We went back to the condo and I had to make all the phone calls back home and let everybody know I'm the eldest son. And after that, I went to the back bedroom and I just sat there on the bed and I was just in shock. And I was asking all the questions like, God, why did you have to let this happen? And God, are you even real? How did I was asking those type of questions. And my mom, I'll never forget, she comes to the doorway and she had been in the other room going through my dad's stuff. And in his briefcase, she found something that he had been working on to give to us. And she tells me this, and I literally have no idea what she's talking about. I see some pieces of paper in her hand, and she walks over to me, hands me these papers, and at the very top it says, Dear Blake, Natalie, and Marcus. And she said, your dad for the last several months has been working on a letter to give to you guys. And I knew when I got that letter that this was going to be something special, and it was going to be my dad's last words to me. I go on to read this letter. It's about 3 or 4 pages of my dad's encouragement, advice. He had put all kinds of Bible verses in there. The last line of this letter that my dad wrote said, you might be in the minority here on earth for your faith, but I assure you that in heaven, you'll be in the majority. Love your dear old dad in Christ
That's
Jesus.
powerful. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll carry that line with me until the day I die, and it's put perspective on life for me. And in that moment, um, it gave me a peace about where my father was. And I've told people that if my dad even was given the option to come back to Earth, he'd tell God, "Nah, I'll just stay right here. I'll wait in heaven on them up here." Um, And so that letter impacted me in such an amazing way and allowed me to get through that time. Obviously, it was 18 years ago. That next year of my life, like I was in mourning. I thought about my dad all the time, but I honestly grew more as a person, developed more in my leadership and relationally as I went back to college and in my relationship with God. And it was because the letter that my dad wrote. And ultimately, what my dad did with that letter was he pointed me to our perfect Heavenly Father, which is the role of a father. And so as I've shared that story over the years with so many different people in one-to-one settings from the stage, um, the Lord really uh, recently in the last year just called me to, hey, you've got to help dads write this letter with the times that we're in. And fathers, they want to connect with their children, but they need to connect with their children. And what your dad did for you, other fathers can be doing for their children. And so I've started helping dads write the letter.
Wow. So tell us more about your legacy letter. You have a challenge that I'm assuming God placed in your heart to to get 1 million dads to do this. So tell us about this legacy letter challenge.
Well, over the years, dads have said, man, I absolutely realize I need to write this letter. But on my own, a dad told me this last week. On my own, I know that I'll never get this letter written. And so I knew if we're going to help 1 million dads write this letter, I was going to have to do more than just inspire dads to do it, that we're going to have to create a way. So we've created this online course to help dads from beginning to end write this letter. And so we break it down into different sections of the letter, and it's the dad's letter. And what I tell dads is, hey, I believe that every dad has a legacy letter already written on their heart, but we just have to draw that letter out of your heart to your mind and to a piece of paper. And so I've helped dads that would say, man, I am not a writer at all. And then there's dads who've written books and I've helped them write a letter. There's dads who have adult children who are writing letters to their children. And then I've helped recently, I'm helping a dad write a letter to his unborn son. And if you don't think that his unborn son, who will have this letter from his dad, who he took the time to write it before he was even born, to say, I love you, I'm proud of you, you think that son's going to ever wonder if his dad loved him? Heck no. And so it's one of my greatest joys in life is to help dads write this letter. I got an email this morning from a dad. This guy is a vice president for one of the NFL teams, and God kind of connected us, and I've been helping him write his letter. And he wrote a letter to his 12-year-old daughter, and he said, I just gave it to her. And man, I could see her in the room reading it, and she just came and gave me the biggest hug in the world and said, Daddy, thank you so much, I love you. And so it was an amazing moment. But what I emailed this dad and I said, yeah, that was a great gift to give her, but it truly is the gift that keeps on giving, because your words in this letter will impact her for the rest of her life. And so um, I help dads, say the 3 things that every person needs to hear from their dad. I love you. I'm proud of you. I believe in you. I help dads come up with 3 to 5 pieces of advice. If you were on your deathbed right now and you knew you had a month to live, but your children have the rest of their life in front of them, like, what are you going to tell them to help them get through? Like, that there's going to be moments in their life where they're going to fail and things aren't going to go well and they're going to face different trials. What advice can you give them right now to help them get through that, to help them succeed in life, and help dad come up with different memories that they want to share with their children that will serve their children well, and then also apologies and regrets. We walk through this online course. Dads can go through it at their own pace. Sometimes like a group will go through, like a church will say, hey, we're all going to go through this together. I've also been pretty amazing, like businesses have been buying it for their employees. And so there was a business last week, he's got 500 men who work for him, and he's like, man, I'm buying this for all 500 of these guys. And it's for some of these guys are blue collar guys, and they would never be on their own buying a resource like this. And man, I am fired up to help these guys write a letter to their children.
So tell our audience where they can sign up for the course and do this for their own family.
Yeah, so you can go to legacyletterchallenge.com. Go to legacyletterchallenge.com and you can see what it's about, but then you sign up right there, and the second you sign up you have access to everything. And then each week I do like a live Zoom session where the dads can jump on, so you're in this kind of online community of other dads that are writing it, and then you can jump on live on a video if you ever have a question. Then I'm there. So
Wow, that's powerful. So, have you kept track of where you're at in your 1 million man challenge?
yeah, so well, let me say this. So we are keeping track of every single dad who's writing a letter, because I don't, it's not about a million dads signing up to write the letter. It's finishing the letter, and we're gonna have a number, letter 573,231. We'll have a name next to it, because man, I believe that every dad matters, every child matters, every letter matters. So we are keeping track of it. So we just started in the last 6 months, and so we're just getting going. So we're under the 1,000 mark. But there's a lot of dads out there that are writing it right now that haven't finished. And so I'm telling people that we're just kind of starting phase 2. Phase 1 is where we developed it. We've had a lot of success. We're preparing for phase 3. Phase 3 is when it just blows up, which I'm trusting God that it will. And I mentioned Terry Bradshaw, and Phil Robertson of Duck Dynasty was on that team. I'm being invited to go speak to a professional football team this summer, and to help those dads write their letters. I'm working with some baseball players right now, 10 baseball players. We're putting together a group, and some of these names are like, if you're a baseball fan, you would absolutely know these names, and they're right. So there's this point where it's going to be like, oh my gosh, like it's going to blow up. But we're not there yet. So we're kind of in phase 2 right now, where we're helping different pockets of people write their letters. But man, it's exciting.
It does sound exciting. Well, I pray my audience will join you in that, because I'm hoping as guys will take this seriously. Because I mean, what you just described, I can see the impact of that, not just on the family, but on society as a whole. I mean, we need to make sure that dads take that role of fatherhood seriously, because the impact that they're passing down to the next generation is unfathomable. You just can't even imagine what that would be with your kids.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, this letter is impactful to a person when they receive this from their. I mean, when you hand a letter to your child that you say, "Hey, I've been working on this for a couple months," like before you even read it, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, like my dad loves me." He would take a couple months, and this is how I felt when I got my letter from my dad. But the person who feels the immediate impact of writing this letter is a father. So it's kind of the same thing. Like if you write out your goals, you're more likely to actually achieve them. As fathers are taking the time to write this letter, they're telling me, man, I'm living out this letter, and I'm a better father. I'm a better person of taking the time to write this letter. So man, a letter absolutely can change somebody's life. But I get excited thinking about when we get to 1 million dads, because if a letter can change one person's life, imagine when 1 million dads write this thing.
Yeah, it's amazing. Is there anything I haven't asked you that I should have asked you?
Uh, man, I feel pretty good that you asked it all, and I said the things that I'm excited to share and talk about. But my main message is, man, fathers absolutely matter. Don't ever believe the lie, the little voice in your head that might say, oh, you're not that important, or your children don't want to listen to you. That's absolutely a lie from the evil one. And your children absolutely need to hear from you. They want to hear from you. And I think the legacy letter is one of the best ways to clearly get down on paper how you feel about your children. And then your words are written down. And so just like my dad's been gone for 18 years, but I still go back to those words, that his words are still there guiding me. And so that can be true for any of us. We don't know when our last day on the planet is going to be.
That's powerful. So how can my listeners find you again on social media? And once again, the legacy letter information?
Yeah, so you can go to legacyletterchallenge.com, and then you can follow me. I'm on Facebook. You can go to The Endurance. So that's the name of our organization. and on Instagram. That's where I post daily, and we have inspiring quotes there every single day from different dads. So, and I post interviews there as well. So, the endurance underscore is the name of the account.
Well, thank you, Blake. I really appreciate this time. This has been a phenomenal time together, and I pray that not only dads but just people are impacted by this challenge, and I can just see what will happen when those kids get those letters. So, and the dads write those letters. So, again, thank you.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you letting me come on and share my story. And as I tell people, every time I get to share my dad's story, it's not necessarily easy, but I enjoy honoring my dad's legacy, and I wouldn't be here without him.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So, for my listeners, also, I've been telling you for months now that a book is coming out. So, let me tell you about the book. It's called Words of Comfort, Words of Strength and Promise. And so, here's what the book's about. There are times you need a little advice and a few answers to navigate the labyrinth of life. Take hope in knowing that all of God's people have gone through the same struggles. Here are 70 devotions from 14 authors on important topics such as relationships, peer pressure, mental health, self worth, and decision making that will guide you through this time in your life. Each devotion is a reminder of God's faithfulness and grace through Jesus, so you can know you always have his forgiveness and mercy. You can find this book in Concordia Publishing House. You can find it at cph.org, and I invite you to buy this. It's really meant for your teenagers, but anyone can benefit from the blessings of reminding themselves and hearing these words of strength and comfort and promise. So pick it up on your way out, and CPH is a great place for you to get some good content and some good Christian writings for your family and for your kids as well. So once again, I want to thank Blake for being my guest, and looking forward to seeing how this process goes forward. And we'll come back and have him on when he reaches 1 million and tell you how that went. The next goal will be 2 million. So we'll kind of bring it back on and see how we're doing. So once again,
That's
thanks, Blake.
Hey, thank you.